All right.
So welcome to Norwegian Psychedelic Science. So we're very, very lucky today to welcome Dr. Petter Grahl Johnstad to give a talk for us on entheogenic spirituality. So Dr. Johnstad is the doctor of psychology and the study of religions and has multiple master's degrees in philosophy, politics, psychology. So he's a student and a researcher here at the University of Bergen, and his works are within the realm of drug policy, drug control, spirituality, psychedelic use and personality, challenging psychedelic experiences, historical use of psychedelics, and many, many more topics. So today he'll be giving a talk about entheogenic spirituality and a historical exploration of entheogenic use in early pre-Christianity. So this talk will be recorded, and would please ask if everyone can keep their microphones muted. And we will also have a question and answer portion at the end of the talk. So if there are any burning questions for Petter as he's going through the talk, or if you need him to make something more clear, do write in the chat. And we'll see if we, try to answer that as quickly as possible. But if it's a question that can wait till the end, then we'll just wait to take your questions at the end of the presentation. So thank you so much. And yes, very nice to hear from you.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me. So my name is Petter Grahl Johnstad, and I'm happy to do this talk about entheogenic spirituality, which is the term I use for the spiritual use of entheogenic drugs or psychedelics, we might say. I'm going to tell you today a little bit. I started exploring this via interviews, and this gave me a kind of an overview of how people are engaging with entheogenic spirituality. And then subsequently, I use quantitative survey methodology to kind of confirm previous findings. So I'll give you an overview of some of my findings. And I was thinking there's a lot of tables and figures. Maybe it gets too technical. I don't know. We'll see. It occurred to me that after going through some of these figures, maybe it was time for something else. So I'll be drawing in some interesting images from the Christian tradition that are suggestive of there being some sort of psychoactive mushroom use, and that's a really controversial subject. So it's just fun to talk about. So we'll get to that. So this was the first paper I published on my own research into entheogenic spirituality, and it was, as you can maybe see, was based on interviews with 26 anonymous people. I interviewed them in writing on the internet, by email mostly, or messaging, and just to give you an overview of finding, it's not easy to summarize finding from qualitative work, because I would have to read text for you, and that doesn't really work in presentations. But I'll try to summarize it just like this. So mostly people would say to me that they would the people who were recruited on the basis that they said they were using entheogen spiritually, they would claim that the use was moderate, and monthly was kind of most people found monthly use acceptable. Some would say that a few times a year maybe was more their idea of moderate use. So that was finding about the frequency of use. They would report two kinds of spiritual experiences, and this is kind of interesting to me, because in psychology there's usually a focus on the mystical experience, and mystical experience is not easy to define, but it's usually related to experiential characteristics involving ego dissolution and some kind of contact or feeling unified with something transcendent, we might say. Then there's also the ordinary spiritual experiences. And these are experiences that people labeled, they talked about them as being spiritual experiences, but they were not of a mystical kind. They were experiences of emotions like peace, love, and joy, but also they were experiences of insight into oneself, into the world, into relations. And I think the mystical experiences are more intense, obviously, but the ordinary, or so-called ordinary spiritual experiences were also more common. So in that sense, there's probably, you could say there's equal weight to both of those. The typical person I talked to, I don't think there was anyone I talked to who was actually involved in a religious tradition. So people, they would be spiritual, but they would not be engaged with any kind of religious, like an organized religion. When they kind of described their spirituality to me, it was very much centered on experience. So that makes sense. The psychedelic experience is kind of the heart of this form of spirituality. And as far as belief is important, it's like they believe in their own experiences, as they would say. There was nobody talked to me about having a sort of general belief in how to say belief in religious doctrines or that sort of more traditional religion. I suppose that happens also, but it was not a factor of the people I talked to. They would not differentiate spirituality from therapy and personal growth. So what I mean, or how I interpreted them, is that engaging in some kind of therapy, self-driven therapy, was spirituality to them. Often they would regard this as being spiritual, and being engaged in some sort of personal growth, experiencing growth as a person in relation to one's entheogen use, would be interpreted as a form of spirituality. They would also describe consequences. The consequences of using entheogens, they would describe them as being very positive for their emotional states, for their ability to relate to people, aesthetic and cognitive capacities. They describe the consequences of this use as being positive for themselves. So on this basis, I I constructed a survey, and so of course with a survey you can involve more people, and I tried to spread this around in several different areas of the internet, and I gained a few hundred respondents. So that's pretty good. It's not a large study by any measure, but it's bigger. And I was at sociology when I was doing this. I've been engaging with different disciplines, you might say. So I'm going to just present to you some of the findings, and we see in this figure the usage frequency of their kind of chosen, the psychedelic drug they chose for the survey, and also for cannabis. And as you can see, the 1 to 10 use occasions over the last 12 months was a very dominant response. So this is what they said. It was in fair agreement with my qualitative findings. There was also, I think, one person, I think, who said he would be using ayahuasca twice a week for the past year. So you also get that kind of usage frequency. And of course, there's no way to know if people were telling the truth, but we can see for cannabis, there was the dominant trend was that they used cannabis more than 100 times over the past year. So compared to that, the response about cannabis seems true. That they chose the maximum response, the maximum usage frequency that my surveys allowed for. So maybe that says also something about the truthfulness in psychedelic use. There was no difference between spiritual and non-spiritual respondents in the survey in terms of usage frequency. So I think like maybe monthly use or less is a dominant way to use psychedelics. That's my impression. So I will talk to you about, I asked them about motivations. Why do people use entheogens? And so here's a figure. They're sorted according to popularity. And we can see that those items for psychological self-exploration and insight and understanding for personal growth, also spiritual experience, were extremely highly endorsed. So very many people rated those items as being a motivation they had for using psychedelic drugs. We can also something more sort of socializing or having fun at using psychedelics at parties and for recreation is also not unpopular. Some people would say that these were reasons to use these drugs. And very few people, just basically 7 or 8%, use them to escape from their personal problems. So we get this overview of motivations. I think this was interesting to see kind of what drives psychedelic use for people who are, well, for the users, basically. So what I did, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I differentiated between non-spiritually motivated users and users who were spiritually motivated. And I looked at what other motivations would these two groups of respondents report. And there are some substantial differences, I would say. You go to items like ego death experience, and it's more than twice the spiritually motivated users highly endorse this item. More than half of the respondents endorse this item. And the previously most popular items, the personal growth and psychological self-exploration items, they were almost universal among the spiritually motivated users. These are 94%. That's everybody, obviously, more or less everybody. So again, this is kind of what is their spirituality about, and it's highly related to personal growth and self-exploration. But also some of the other items, they were not. There was not a major difference in in using psychedelics for socializing. So 27% was versus 21%. So, and also fun, party, and recreation. I mean, it's smaller for the spiritually motivated users, but there's not a significant difference. So the stars in between here indicate a statistically significant difference. And so people who are spiritually motivated entheogen users, they're not, obviously, they're not against having fun, but it's not a central motivation for their use. All right, so we go to the experiences themselves, where I try to kind of map out how the respondents would kind of characterize their experiences. And I'm sorry for this rather massive table, but here, again, I differentiated between spiritually motivated users and non-spiritually motivated users. And you can see, by the way, that about 2/3 of the respondents claim to have spiritual motivation. So that's a pretty dominant trend in itself. So obviously there's a lot to talk about here, and I'm not going to go into everything. We can see that items such as joy, love, and peace, like the experience of these emotions or feelings, they are popular both among non-spiritually motivated users and the people with spiritual motivations, but more so among the latter. And these items, and also insight into the world, into your relations, and into yourself, are very highly endorsed. Also, this connection with nature, very highly endorsed among the spiritually motivated users. I was also interested to see that the negative items, so I added a few negative items. You can see anger and hate, not very many people endorse that. Confusion is a bit higher among the spiritually motivated users. It's not significant, but there's a tendency. Fear is also twice as highly endorsed among the spiritually motivated users. And I don't have a clear understanding of why, but I'm thinking that probably these users would tend to maybe to use higher doses because they have a different sort of reason for engaging with this in the first place. So maybe they use higher doses and they go into experiences that are more intense. That's my interpretation. I'm just speculating basically, but it seems reasonable. And actually, all of them mostly not significant. You see also sadness, so it's 14% for the non-spiritually motivated users and 21% for the spiritually motivated users. So it's higher, it's not significant. The difference is not within the 0.5 significance level, but there's a continued trend towards higher endorsement of the negative items. So maybe these people are more honest, or maybe they are more willing to confront sort of negative emotions. I don't know actually, but it's just an interesting finding also. Also, one thing that the item at the bottom, so words cannot describe the experience, and mystical experiences, one of the sort of fundamental characteristics is of that type of experience is called ineffability. So that's the notions that it's impossible to describe this experience. But as we see, also the non-spiritually motivated users endorse that item. To a third of the respondents endorsed it, and it's higher for the other group. But I think actually that to a large extent it's possible to say that psychedelic or entheogenic experience is actually pretty hard to describe, and this ineffability item is not very it doesn't kind of capture spirituality or mystical experience, because all kinds of psychedelic experience is pretty hard to describe. That's just my interpretation, but you see these differences. There are many things to talk about, and it's to me it's interesting that there are many significant differences between the groups, and these are not large groups. So I mean, it's not a large sample. So in order to be significant, there would have to be substantial, and they're pretty substantial differences in many cases.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, since it was popping up in the chat and a good opportunity, can you tell us the difference between non-spiritually motivated users and spiritually motivated users? Like how are they sort of separated and defined?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the question. I just I just used one item, and I asked people, do you engage in entheogen use? Are you motivated by spiritual experience? Just the idea of obtaining spiritual experience, does that motivate your use? So that's just that one item. So well, that's what it is. It is a pretty simple approach actually. So, but seems meaningful. There are meaningful differences between these groups just on that one indicator. And yeah, so that's interesting. I think that's interesting to understand. Okay. I also, so this is maybe it's a complex technical thing, but it's a factor factor loadings. We see so let me try to explain this to you. So you see experiential characteristic, that's the different characteristics, and then there's a F1 until F6, and these are the factors. So basically, the items that are listed in a factor, they are the kind of characteristics that tend to occur together. And this methodology is useful for seeing seeing trends in the underlying data. So the first factor is the F1. We see it's insight into yourself, love, connection to people, peace, joy, insight into the world, connection with nature. So these items tend to co-occur. So the people they report one of these items, they tend also to report the others. That's a way of understanding this. So I understood this as a kind of basic this is the basic sort of the fundament for a positive entheogenic or psychedelic experience. When there is a positive, a kind of psychedelic experience that people like, these are the kind of characteristics that constitute this the fundament of that experience. Then you have the second factor, and we see that this is contact with transcendent forces and non-ordinary beings, and unity with transcendent forces, a feeling of homecoming, innovations, and ego death or dissolution. So this is a more kind of mystical group of characteristics. The fact that these are separate indicates that we had at least two kinds of basic psychedelic experiences. We have the more sort of ordinary, the peace, love, and joy, and insight kind of experience, and then we have the more mystical type of experience. And pretty much everybody would understand the more mystical type of experience as being a spiritual experience. But some people, like half the people, would also understand the more sort of ordinary experience as being a spiritual experience. So that's interesting for the question of what is spirituality. When somebody says that they are that they have spiritual experiences or that they are interested in spirituality, what does that mean? And it may mean it can mean different things to different people. But when people have this kind of the first type of experience, that would tend to some of the people would tend to see that in itself as being a part of that spirituality. So you can also explain the third factor. So you see surprise, words cannot describe the experiences, this confusion. So this is a more kind of neutral item, not necessarily indicative of a difficult experience, but it indicates that the person was maybe it was a bit overwhelming. It's a kind of overwhelming factor. So that would occur separately. So sometimes this kind of overwhelming thing would come into play, and these kind of items would tend to co-occur in that case. And then we can see that three sort of factors involving more specific types of negative items: anger, hate, disgust, fear, sadness, and then a behavior and relation to other people sort of factor. So these would be, I suppose, possibly people could have a psychedelic experience characterized only by those negative factors, maybe just a few of them. So basically a person would feel that they are stuck in some sort of unfortunate experience. Although it should be said that some people who have these sort of challenging or difficult experiences, they later report that they were useful for their development in some way. So I like these kind of factor analysis. They are interesting. I hope it means something to you. It's to me anyway, it was meaningful to see that the types of experience tend to crystallize in a sense that I could understand intuitively. There seems to be a system to this kind of how the experiences, the characteristics of the experience tend to co-occur. All right. So let's look at spirituality and religion and how people who are engaged in entheogenic spirituality, what is their relationship to religion? So I was doing this part of this in for a project relating to the studies of religions, and to me it's interesting to understand how this form of spirituality relates to established religions. And some things were pretty convincing, I think. So I asked people, I'm sorry about the formatting of this table, by the way. The line beneath Buddhism should be above Buddhism. It's just the editing people in the journal. Doesn't matter. But you can see Buddhism. So I asked people if they had a background with a certain religious tradition, and I also asked them if they feel connected to certain religious traditions at this time. And so you can see for Buddhism, so 10% seem to have maybe grown up with a Buddhist, maybe in a Buddhist family. I didn't go that deep into it, so I don't know on what basis would a person say that they have a background in Buddhism? I don't know what that represents. But maybe growing up in a family or in some way having a background related to Buddhism. So 10%, but today 29%. So it tripled, and that's a very. It seems to me to be a very strong finding. For Hinduism, it actually quadrupled, so it went from 3% to 12%. And there were also the others grew, but not as substantially. The only one that did not grow was Christianity. So more people claim to have a background in Christianity than to be to feel at the present to feel connected to Christianity. It was not significant. I think it was a level of 0.6, so it was just in the area of being significant. This agrees with my findings from the qualitative interviews, because I talked to some people and they had a background. They'd been living in Christian families. So most of these people are from the West. They're Western people, and they grew up in religious families and mostly Christian families. And people tended to, there was a tendency for people to get more interested in Eastern religions, including especially Buddhism, but also Hinduism, and maybe leaving behind Christianity. So that's just a descriptive finding. We could speculate, why is the use of psychedelics perhaps more in line with Eastern religions? Maybe you have opinions on that. Also, it should be noted that we don't know if this is a result of their psychedelics use. So they changed or kind of gained a new interest in different religions, perhaps as a consequence of their psychedelics use. That's one interpretation. It could also be the other way around. Maybe they gained an interest in Buddhism and perhaps getting involved in meditation or so forth, and maybe this contributed to a to psychedelics use. I don't know, but I think this a pretty substantial movement in people's sort of religious lives here. I also did these are regression analysis, and most of you have probably, maybe you're not familiar with reading these sort of tables. So I'm just going to explain to you the first column called Conversion to Buddhism. So I asked people, this is an analysis of people who claimed not to have a background in Buddhism, but who later, at the present time, they felt connected to Buddhism. So I tried to analyze how this conversion, it's not an official conversion, it's just a conversion towards feeling interest or feeling connected to Buddhism. And so you see the items in bold, they are significant. There's one personality characteristic, agreeableness, that is significant for conversion to Buddhism, and I don't know why. It's kind of hard to interpret. But what the strongest item by far is the mystical experience. So people who had converted to Buddhism, in the sense that I mean, they had also tended to endorse having had mystical type characteristics in their experiences, if that made sense. So the people who had mystical experiences, they also tended to convert to Buddhism. And the same is true for Hinduism, and even to a smaller degree for New Age alternative. So the New Age is a bad term, but I don't know what to call this. It's sort of the modern alternative spirituality, call it what you want. So I hope you get some what I want you to take away from this is that the people who converted to these Eastern types of religions, who felt more connected to those religions, they also tended to have mystical experiences when using psychedelics. So there seems to be a connection here, and I think that's important. So we'll talk about consequences of entheogen use. And these are the respondents' self-assessed consequences. I asked them, how has your psychedelic use affected your life in terms of your physical health, psychological health, your spiritual practice, ability to get along with people, and personal happiness? And I have to, so this is, I asked them to sort of score themselves on a 5-scale variable. So basically, the the bottom item 1 was that it has been getting seriously worse. There was a serious worsening of this item, and then the second level was a worsening. Third level was mixed or no sort of overall effect, and then an improvement and a serious improvement. So everything from 3 and above basically indicates some improvement, and as you can see, everything here is higher than 3. So there is a across the board, people are saying that their psychedelics use has improved their lives, basically. You can also, so again, I differentiated between the people who claim to be spiritually motivated and the people who did not make that claim. And you can see the stars between them indicate significance. So the spiritually motivated users claim to have had more benefits, we might say, than the non-spiritually motivated users. So people who engage with psychedelics use from a kind of spiritual motivation, they probably engage with it in a different way, probably don't go so much to parties and have sort of socialize on psychedelics, probably to a greater extent engage with them in a different sense. And they have subsequently, they find that this psychedelics use has helped them more, that it has contributed to more personal happiness and a better ability to get along with people to some extent. All right, so I think this is the last table, and again, it's a regression analysis. So the point here was to analyze, why do people feel, or the people who feel that their spiritual practice or their psychological health has improved or worsened, what kind of other factors are related to this change? So we'll look at the psychological health in the middle here, because that's the most interesting. So only the items in bold are kind of worth mentioning. So you can see extraversion. You see that the thing noted with a B is minus, it's negative, and then there's a star there, it's significant. So the people who score higher on extraversion, that means they are more extroverts. They like to go to parties and talk to people, and those people having that that personality characteristic also seems to have here contributed to a lower sort of self-assessment of how psychedelics use has affected their health. So people who go to parties, probably people who are extrovert, they go to parties and they use psychedelics in that setting. That's my interpretation. I'm speculating, we might say, but they like to use, if an extrovert probably likes to use psychedelics in socialized in settings with other people where they socialize, and these people report in this study that their psychological health had improved to a smaller degree than the people who are not extroverts. I hope that made sense. It gets technical, but openness, you can see, is directed in the opposite sense. So people who score high on being open to experience, they also score high. They rate the improvement gained in their psychological health as higher from using psychedelics. And we see the same thing for spiritual motivation. So people who are spiritually motivated, this just basically repeats the last table. Basically. So people who are spiritually motivated, they report a better kind of psychedelics use has affected their life in a more positive way. Very clearly the opposite for escapist motivation. So these are not many people, right? But some people claim that they were using psychedelics in order to escape from their problems. And this endorsing this item indicates that they would also tend to score the benefits from psychedelics use as being lower. Okay, and for mystical experience, we see not for psychological health, it's not within the significance level, but for the other, for spiritual practice and personal happiness, it has also contributed to a self-assessment that psychedelics use was more good for me, if you understood that. Okay, so by now I was thinking when I made this that you've probably seen enough tables, and maybe you are. It's time to move into something else. So I thought I would make a part 2 of the presentation and talk about some interesting, to me, interesting art from the early Christian tradition. So this is kind of completely different in one sense, but it's evidence or possible evidence that there was and spiritual use of psychoactive mushrooms in early Christian communities. Okay, so I took this part from a talk. This was a talk from my doctoral degree in the study of religions in Trondheim. And so here's one. I think maybe this. I think many people have seen this before. It's pretty well known. So this is very old, from the 4th century, and it's from Italy, from a basilica in Aquileia. And as you can see, it's pretty obviously this is on the floor, as I said, and there's a bowl or some kind of basket maybe, and there are mushrooms in this basket. So why would there be a bowl or a basket of mushrooms on this the floor of this place of worship? Well, it is open to 2 interpretations. So one thing is that these mushrooms could be they could be special mushrooms. They could be psychoactive mushrooms. That's possible. It's also possible that these are just food mushrooms. That these are mushrooms that people would have for dinner. And I think to a modern person, it would be strange to just have random food items in a place of worship. We don't go to church and see hamburgers and French fries on pieces of art. And but this is the 4th century. Maybe they were food insecure. It was a very chaotic era, right? So maybe they were just food insecure. They didn't have food, and this artwork was just to give thanks to God, I suppose, for when they had the opportunity to eat. So it's not. We don't know. That's my conclusion. It's suggestive, but it doesn't prove anything, I think. Here's a different kind of figure, and this is from Rome, from what is today known as the Lateran Baptistery, and it's a ceiling mosaic. And I think you can. This is a bigger version. You can see there's a mushroom in some kind of, I guess we could say, a grail or a cup. I think it's pretty. It would be strange to suggest that this is a food mushroom. This is not how you present food, I think. That seems impossible to me. So this is clearly, as I would understand it, a special mushroom, and I don't think there can be any doubt about it. But one thing that is absent from this picture is any kind of Christian imagery. There's nothing specifically Christian about this image, as far as I can see. So one sort of interpretation would be that this was a pre-Christian tradition, some sort of place of worship that was not necessarily related to Christianity in the first place. Then the Christians took over this place of worship, and they just kept the ceiling intact. Maybe the fact that they kept the ceiling intact is meaningful. We could say, I mean, why would they keep the ceiling intact? It's a pretty, it says something, it expresses a pretty clear tradition. I mean, these people were having a special relationship with mushrooms. I don't think there's no room for question about it. And the Christians kept it intact. But we don't know if the Christians continued the tradition or if they just liked the other. So who knows? Finally, there's one. This one I think is the most convincing, and so this is in the 6th century, and it's a very famous basilica, the Santa Polonea in Ravenna, And maybe you don't see it. Well, one thing you will see here is that this is an obvious Christian image, right? It has the crucifix, it's Christ on the top, and the Saint Apollinaire at the bottom below the crucifix. So a very straightforward Christian image. And one thing you maybe don't see is that there's a mushroom, a pretty straightforward mushroom as far as I can see, and there's a disembodied hand. So we have this interesting, there's a line from Christ on the top, and then there's the mushroom, the disembodied hand, then a crucifix, and finally the saint. To me, this looks like a very convincing artwork indicating that these people in Ravenna at this time, at least some of the people who made the artwork, had a special relationship to mushrooms that they connected to their Christianity. I don't think that it's possible to interpret this piece of art in a different sense. It's straightforwardly Christian, and I think the mushroom is pretty straightforward as well, although I will leave that for you to decide, I suppose. It looks like a mushroom to me, and it's located on a very kind of a central place, right? This is not just a random mushroom. This is a very important place in the overall piece of the artwork. So, okay, I'll show you a few more. We have this image from St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, and this is a world-class place of worship. It's a very important church in the Christian tradition, and we see that on the left-hand side we have Christ appearing among what might look like mushrooms, although it has also been interpreted as that these apparent mushrooms are trees, and that the image is actually showing is a reverse perspective. So these are trees in reverse perspective, and reverse perspective is a sort of strange Orthodox art tradition where things that are located more closer to the viewer, they are depicted as being smaller. So this could be kind of trees in the foreground, some would say, and it's hard to know. They also, I suppose they could be both, that they could be mushroom masquerading as reverse perspective mushrooms. That seems possible to me, and it's supported by the next piece of work I will show you, which is, let's just move to it, is this one. We see also here we have mushrooms or something that might appear to be mushrooms in the foreground, but we also see that they have split stems. And I'm not aware that there exists mushrooms with a split stem. I don't think so. So if these are meant to indicate mushrooms, they are also camouflaged. However, there is a second sort of mushroom in this picture, and maybe you see it, you turn it on the head, and you see that the entrance is the kind of stem, and then the whole ground constitutes the cap of the mushroom. So I think it would be true to say that we have two sort of graphical elements that might be interpreted as mushrooms in this picture. And I forgot to say, this is pretty late, 15th, 16th century, and it's from England. So it would, to me, this would suggest that there was perhaps just among artists, we don't know, but there was still possible, gives the indication that there's a living tradition that with the two kind of graphical items indicating a special relationship to mushrooms, they would tend to support each other, but they also, there is the suggestion that they need to camouflage it. They need to kind of hide it and make the foreground, perhaps these are mushrooms, but they have split stems, so they are kind of camouflaged. All right, so that's the best evidence that I've seen for the existence of a traditions of spiritual or Christian mushroom use, you could say, psychoactive mushroom use in the Christian tradition. And it's a highly controversial subject. People have been people have been saying very strange things about this. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the works of Allegro, and he published back in 1970, I think. And he said that basically Christ, in the early Christian tradition, Christ was just a symbol for the mushroom. And that seems like a very an overinterpretation. So maybe it was like that for some people, but it seems very unlikely that everybody involved in Christianity in the late antique age would be seeing Christ as a symbol for the mushroom. That it just seems they were very different groups at this time, and a lot of very many different early Christian groups. It seems very unlikely to me that they all had the same view on anything, especially something as controversial as, or especially involving the image of Christ. So to me, what this indicates is that there may have been, especially in the early era, there may have been some continuation of pagan, pre-Christian, we might say, traditions involving psychoactive mushroom use. Some of those may be continued among some Christian communities. It was probably not popular among the authorities of the time, but perhaps it managed to survive here and there for perhaps as long as 1,000 years or 1,500 years. All right, so I think that was the last thing I had. So that means I'm finished, basically. You have questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see here. Just a moment. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So, oh, fantastic presentation. But it just reminded me actually of the Pythia, or the oracle of Delphi, and the high priestesses of the time, and that sort of had a reach, if I remember correctly, something like 1500 BC. So a long time till maybe 400 BC. I'm not sure of the exact timeline, but they were known to, at least what's sort of coming out in some of the historical texts, is that they were known to use hallucinogenic substances like kikeon and stuff like that. So it's interesting. There's quite, but I never encountered the use of mushroom in Christian history. So that's really fascinating. So yeah, I'd like to kind of go deeper into that. I have a couple questions from the chat. So if anyone wants to ask questions, you can just type them in the chat. I'll start with Anna's question. So she has two questions. The first, what would you do next in terms of research, or what is your ideal study that you would like to conduct?
So as of the time, I'm working more generally on, we could say, drug policy. So I'm engaged in a project in philosophy where I'm arguing about discussing the merits of the present criminal regime for drugs, drug criminalization regime, and it's close to getting finished. So I'll probably well, so I'm working on that. I'm also what I've been working the most, using most of my time on the past few months, is a review of medical literature relating to the associations between cannabis use and various psychiatric disorders, including psychosis, and I kind of I'm in the process of conducting a review comparing the dangers from cannabis to the dangers from tobacco use, but also from bad diet quality, like people eating lots of fast food, and of what they call sedentary behavior, which is a kind of watching TV for 4 hours or more every day. And so far, the results indicate that weekly cannabis use is about as strongly associated with psychosis and depression and a whole range of psychiatric disorders as those other behaviors. So when people, they tend to focus on kind of one result, like the association between cannabis use and psychosis, and interpreting this in the sense that cannabis is very dangerous to people. But actually, when you look at it more broadly, cannabis appears to be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes on a daily basis, and also as watching TV or eating hamburgers, especially every day. So that's really interesting to me. It's not directly related to psychedelics, but it's a kind of overall view of how these harms that drug use is associated with various harms, but also other unhealthy behaviors are associated with those harms and at the same kind of strength. So there's nothing unique about the effect from cannabis as far as I can find. So that's what I'm working on right now. And what is my ideal study? I think the best thing I can say is that I think we need a lot of different perspectives. So to me, it was interesting to have these qualitative findings and then to sort of use a survey with a more quantitative methodology to get them to work together, or to see how the quantitative methodology might support the original findings that I gained from just talking to people and asking them what they were doing. And this sort of mixed method study, I think we should see more of that, and especially when it comes to something as personal and kind of hard to quantify as your inner experience, we might say, your personal experience of while doing perhaps meditation or doing psychedelics, and how that kind of affects your life. And I think it's hard to quantify, and because mostly psychologists tend to prefer quantitative approaches because they are more regarded as being more rigorous and more, you can have a greater level of faith in those results. I think that's the impression, but I also think that we need to kind of get the different perspective by talking to people and get a kind of talking to people in depth that allows for a sort of deeper understanding of how psychedelic use affects them. So my perfect study would be to mix different approaches and get a mixed method study, if you wish.
Yeah,
all right.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think especially when you're going into these phenomenological aspects and so on, and even these out-of-body type of experiences as well, that a lot of people do experience, you need to have some kind of mixed method approach. So Ahmed here in the chat says, for the first table, he says, how do we know that the differences are real and not due to the fact that spiritual users and non-spiritual users may have fundamentally different personality types, so which make them use different words to describe the same experience? Interesting.
So we don't know that. We don't know that. But I did in some, I don't know what the first table you were referring to. I guess this is the first table. So I did control for them in some of these regression analysis. I haven't showed you all of them, right? So when you do this multiple regression and you involve control variables, then you actually, it's kind of hard to explain, but by including these personality variables, we're kind of holding the effect from personality, holding that stable. Maybe it's more easy to explain in terms of age. So I've included age here, and maybe there's an impact from age, so that older people tend to explain things differently or experience things differently. If so, this kind of the inclusion of this age variable means that the effects from the other variables are not impacted by changes in the age variable. The inclusion of the age variable means that we're kind of controlling for age, we're holding age constantly. So if there's an impact from age, it's kind of being canceled out. This is methodology. It's kind of complex, difficult to explain, but maybe I made sense. I don't know.
I think he probably knows, because his following question, he's asking about Cohen's D. So he probably knows.
Uh,
Are there effect sizes such as Cohen's D reported in the paper? Yeah. Yeah, do
um,
you report those effect sizes?
no, I didn't. I did not engage with that. So,
Okay.
no.
So Anna asks, what are some of the responses to your study you find interesting?
Mm, well, I think so. The one paper that people have responded to most, that has gotten the most attention, was a small qualitative study I did on microdosing. And I don't. It's not completely clear to me why people have. It has gotten a lot of citations. Um, so that's just, I don't know what to say. It's just interesting. Maybe I suppose it was perhaps one of the first studies of psychedelic microdosing, and in some way it struck a nerve, I suppose. So that was fun to see. Maybe also, actually, I think among non-researchers, I think the qualitative studies they are more interested in my qualitative findings than the quantitative findings, and maybe that's because the qualitative findings or the papers based on them, they communicate more clearly to people who don't have this background in statistics and maths. And yeah, so it's a good way of communicating with people who are not personally involved in research and don't have this kind of technical capability, which I don't know how many of the viewers have. So that's a good reason, I think, to engage with qualitative methodology, is to kind of communicate more clearly with ordinary people too, and that's valuable also. I like to have when I say ordinary people, I just mean people who don't have this technical ability, and it's not a universal ability, obviously. So this is I would advise more attention to that, but yeah.
So Celia also wants to know how many respondents participated in the study.
Yeah, so I think there was a total of 319, including everybody. So it's not a large study. It's a moderate size, we could say. But yeah.
Larger than some of our neuroimaging studies, but yeah. I also I've got a question mostly about the reduction in Christianity, like conversions to Christianity, or actually conversions out of Christianity in this case. I know it was non-significant. You said it was P of 0.06, but I'm curious if, a lot of times people are just sort of prescribed Christianity, like when they're little and it's not something that they chose themselves. So I'm just curious about, if it's people who had, chosen Christianity as their chosen religion, or just simply they grew up Christian and then they kind of opted out when they felt, oh, it seems like there's this different worldview and I'm feel more comfortable there. So maybe the dropouts were like there was a sort of a mixed potential in yeah. I keep hearing how you're voxed up, how you're raised. And in terms of also the stigma as well, maybe because it's a little bit could be dogmatic in some homes versus others, and psychedelic experience definitely can broaden one's horizon, thus kind of decreasing any type of restrictive or dogmatic approach to any particular religion. So just curious if maybe the reduction had to do maybe with the differences in the Christian backgrounds, whether it was forced, if you know what I mean, or chosen.
Yeah. So that the simple answer is that actually I don't know, because this is just quantitative. I just ask people about these basic sort of where are you at kind of, and there was no opportunity to ask follow-up questions, right? So all I can do is to kind of speculate, and we should be careful. I should be careful, because it's possible to hurt people's feelings. I mean, people engage with religions that it may be hurtful to them to speculate. So a little bit care. But if I were to speculate a little bit, it is one of the kind of experiences that are quite commonly reported among psychedelics users is that they have, as I have it here somewhere, it's the unity with transcendent forces, which you may interpret as unity with God, feeling united with God, like as you have become one with God. And in Christianity, there is some resistance towards this possibility that you can be one with the divine. Some Christians, not all, I suppose, but some Christians have they would say that this is impossible and that there is an unbridgeable gap between the human and the divine, and only God can bridge it, kind of. So you cannot bridge it on your own. So this idea that you can be united with something divine is not universally accepted in Christianity. Whereas in traditions such as Buddhism and Hinduism, so in Hinduism, we have the Advaita Vedanta tradition, which basically says that at heart, or at the sort of fundament, everybody is not different from God. So this kind of understanding of being united with something divine is more, as I understand it, more easily accepted in those traditions. So maybe there's a difference there, but this is speculative. This is just me interpreting after the fact, and the more kind of non-speculative answer is that I just don't know. But yeah,
I mean, it could make sense because I've met so many different Christians in my life, and I much more prescribe to this Gnostic type of transcendental experience with a cosmic Christ energy. But at the same time, there are a lot of Christians that I've met and from different factions and different denominations and so on, where they really feel that the priest, for example, is the intermediary as well to the divine. So they already have all these other hierarchies that also kind of need to be in place for them to feel that connection. So I don't know. I think your analysis seems seems pretty legitimate, considering how many different experiences of connection I've been able to witness in just my own history, being from my own Christian background, and also because I find psychedelic experiences and non-psychedelic mystical experiences just strengthen those beliefs, but they didn't have anything. They didn't exclude either any Hindu or Buddhist type beliefs, and I think there are some distinctions too, as people study religions as well, that you can also have non-exclusive experiences, like they can all be divine experiences, and there could be also just the experience of many divine beings, and well, there are just so many experiences really. But yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. It's interesting. So does anyone have any further questions? Lisa, maybe Emily, just be sure to write some. Oh, I see one here. Yes, the lecture will be published on YouTube. Anna, I think, is still here. Peter said that there's a little copyright potential issue on one of the pictures he's used. So we can maybe talk about it, but most likely it should be okay, and it will likely be on the Norsk Psykedelisk Vitenskap YouTube channel, which you can all go and subscribe to. Yeah, any last questions or comments? Final question, is the data open source? Ahmed asks.
Yeah, you can find the data set. I don't have the link as of here and now. And I don't remember what the thing is called. I have linked to it from my publications. So if you find some of them are openly available, and there's a link to the data set. So I think it's an SPSS file. You could go into it and look around. It's technical, but it's I welcome you to do it and see if you find something fun. So go ahead, please. It should be available. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone can Google his ResearchGate as well. And I think most of his articles are published there, or Google Scholar, and just type in his name and then you'll be able to get access to his articles. And of course, we've started a Google Drive where we're putting some articles for, for everyone to go and download. So we'll just keep also adding articles. I have already added a few from Petter, but we can add some more. So yeah, if that's it, I would like to thank everybody for joining this evening, and thank you especially to Dr. Johnstad. I'm just very, very, very glad and thankful that you really, he's so busy and he took some time for us here at MPV, and I'm just extremely grateful. So thank you so much. And I hope to be able to meet you in person as well, since
Yeah,
we're
sure.
all in Bergen.
It was a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. It was fun to talk. Oh, it's always fun to talk about my work. So no, yeah, I'm happy to do it. So I hope it was. Thank you for your attention, everybody, and I hope it meant something to you, that you understood something. So yeah, it was fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll just stop recording.